A great pleasure to welcome a special guest. His name is George Daniels, and he's just released a book called George Works, The Making of a New Canadian. Just before we move along and start talking with George, and welcome, by the way.
Thank you very much, Bill. Pleasure to be here. Appreciate this opportunity.
Thank you. We want to give folks a little bit of background. Born in Britain, but a Canadian by choice. George has worked, well, I like to say, more jobs than Richard Kimball. Everybody who watched The Fugitive on TV knew that every week he had to leave town and get another job. You weren't quite like that, but you've had a lot of jobs. Bush pilot, builder, cowboy, commercial pilot, heavy equipment operator, TV tower technician, tour guide, national sales manager in the worlds of radio, automotive parts, and private aircraft, sports promoter, founding partner of a highly successful national advertising agency. The book tells this story, and I've had a chance to read it, and it tells it in a wonderful, wonderful way. It will be interesting no matter what your own background is. I know George because we worked together a few years ago, but let's go to the beginning. First 12 years of your life, you're in the British Isles.
That's right, and I'm a kid. And the Second World War starts at when I was 5 years of age, and we were living in Rickmansworth, just outside of London. And so the wardens are trying to billet evacuees, and my mother accepts several of them. And I had a very precious scooter, and they proceeded to destroy it in about an hour and a half.
And were you at that age aware of really what this was all about, or were you just scared?
No, we were scared, but we were aware when you've got air raid sirens going off, you know there's something wrong. And so when you turn around and you get a couple of years older, they're starting to tell you in the school what is going on. So one of the things next to my computer is a little book called How to Draw a Spitfire and a Hurricane, given to me by Jeff Moss, and the picture of it is in the book, of how to draw airplanes and what the difference was between a friendly and another one. And so overhead, we've got buzz bombs, we've got barrage balloons, and so we've got all of this happening, and we've got shrapnel. Now, shrapnel is a result of bullets from the airplane. And the bullets are made of brass, and they're made of copper and lead. Well, the lead disintegrates, but the little pieces of copper and brass, we used to collect those. They were collectibles, just like kids collect conkers. I've got a bigger piece of brass than you do, but I'll trade you for this.
Okay, like marbles.
Like marbles. That's what it was all about. So it was fun. And then another fun thing occurred. America came into the war in 1942, so we lived 10 miles as the crow flies from the Liverpool docks. That was the first time I really was scared. My dad came home. He was in Montgomery's 8th Army. He took my brother and I out for a walk in a country lane 10 miles from the Liverpool docks, and we heard this airplane coming straight towards us. And it was a Stuka dive bomber. My father grabbed myself and my brother, threw us in the ditch, got on top of us, and the plane went strafing the road that we just vacated. So talk about scary, yes. So I experienced that horrors of war.
You were too close to what they were aiming at.
That's right. But then the upside was the Americans showed up about 1943 in our little village, and they built a PX in a barn. And then we saw stuff we'd never seen before. We saw cakes, we saw Coca-Cola, we saw Wrigley gum, and we came up with the great expression, got any gum, chum? And we'd get gum. This was fantastic.
The war ended. Canada. Why Canada?
England was more broke in 1946 because the Lend-Lease had ended, and my dad could not get a job in England. He was shipped off to Palestine. He was in the advanced engineering group that basically was the forerunner of today's Israel, and pipelines and all that sort of stuff. And I remember we had a family conference in 1946 when I'm now 11. My brother is 9.5 or 10. My sister's about 5. And he said, Bunt, if I can't get a job here, we better go someplace where I can get a job. And it's either South Africa or Canada. My mother immediately said, we're not going to South Africa. We're going to Canada because I like reading John Buchan.
Okay.
And that's how we then got on the Aquitania to come to Pier 21 in Halifax, landed on December the 20th, 1947. And my teachers had said, oh, you boys are going to see all those cowboys and Indians.
Not in Halifax.
No, there was no cowboys. There was no Indians. But then we discovered something we didn't know, had never seen. It was called a hot dog with sweet mustard.
Wow. I'm surprised the Americans didn't bring that when they came to Liverpool.
They didn't.
So you come here, you grow up, you go to McMaster, you discover this love for flying, which maybe started when you were drawing the Spitfires. And you led that into a lifelong love of being in an airplane. You've been a bush pilot. At some point, you became a commercial airline pilot, but then some health issues, I know, intervened. And that's when you first entered the world of advertising and sales, which was to lead you to a place where you and I met, and that was back at the radio station CFRB in Toronto in the 70s and 80s. How'd you get that job?
Standard Broadcast Sales. Well, some part of arriving in Canada was I had this English accent like the Beatles, and I talked like this, and the first thing that happened is I got the you-know-what beaten out of me because I was a limey, so I stopped talking like that. I started talking like this. But the French Canadians then turned around and beat up this little guy, and then I learned French. Ça, c'est la raison que je suis capable de parler en français avec les autres immédiatement, and that is what it takes to become a bilingual Canadian. So I was stolen in the advertising business by the big Channel 10, the largest independent French language television in the world, and went to work for them. And I was a sales representative for them and the start of what was called Actualité Magazine, which is the Macleans of Quebec. So I then knew the advertising world. And then one of our former colleagues, who you will remember, Waldo Holden, heard about me, and he was the president of Standard Broadcast Sales, and he stole me away from Paul Langlais. And now I'm in representing not only CFRB, but CHQR in Calgary and CKNW Vancouver, CJOB Winnipeg. And an interesting thing talking about the changes bill, because you and I lived this, and that was in 1966, this new thing called FM came in. We didn't have FM in those days. So all of a sudden it arrives. And FM then was brand new, but the audience is only so big. So some part of the only so big, they're slicing the audience, trying to sell airtime, et cetera, et cetera. And I became very good at working with my salespeople to generate the dollars in spite of all this fragmentation.
You had time to learn to run marathons, and that stayed with you.
It certainly did. Well, what was going on basically in the 70s, we were all discussing and conscious of the rapid change in corporate everything and the importance of health and staying healthy. So we were now in Orillia. I was working for a company called Otaco Bartaco. It became Galtaco. And I was selling castings, bus seats, and everything else, traveling all over North America with my sales reps, getting things specified. And the local YMCA had a management stress program called, okay, let's look after ourselves and try to run 6 kilometers without any stress, and do that 4 or 5 days a week. One thing led to the other, so then there was a bet on, hey, we're going to go to the Boston Marathon. So now comes the training. So the Boston Marathon is to fitness and health as the Indianapolis 500 is to cars. So I've been a cardiovascular aficionado ever since, because it's what keeps my brain in gear. And so now I don't run anymore, but I power walk. And a lot of people around Collingwood and Muskoka see me power walking all the time.
And you've been part of this Southern Georgian Bay community now for many, many years. And you may be retired from, full-time job, but you have never stopped being involved in the community in all its aspects, including becoming an advocate. And it goes back to the flying part. Collingwood Airport, all of a sudden, a few years ago, they were going to stick up some of these big wind turbines right at the end of the runway, and you got involved.
Yes, I did. Well, the driver behind that was some prominent names in the community called Kevin Elwood and Chuck Magwood. And we knew that putting up industrial wind turbines, there were 500 feet and 8 of them right opposite the end of runway 31 in Collingwood. So I could crash into it 5 seconds after I take off, or I couldn't land effectively. That was no good. Also, the blot on the escutcheon of the nice, beautiful environment had was taken up by your sister company On the Bay magazine. And Janet Lees and Jeff Shearer and everybody else wrote some phenomenal articles that I used with the other pilots to fight the court case about this. We're not against alternate energy. We're not against green energy. We're not against wind. We're not against turbines. We're not against all that sort of stuff. We're just against them when they interfere with normal aviation transportation.
Well, there's a health aspect to it as well, through the hospital.
That's right. So the other thing was that the hospital needs the airport so the ambulance can vector in and out of the hospital. And the wind turbines also has a real estate component. Because if you look at where wind turbines go up, say down in the eastern Kingston, St. Lawrence, all of their real estate stuff just plunged in value. And so some part of our story here with the real estate folks say, if you have all these 500 feet wind turbines in this area, your whole real estate mix of this gorgeous community is going to go upside down in a apple cart. So we got the message through, and I think between Chuck Magwood and Kevin Elwood and
you won the battle.
we won the battle, and
It's the economy, Stu, but didn't
that's
somebody
right.
say that at one point?
That's it, exactly.
I think it wasn't here. It was in the U.S.
We won
but-
the battle.
And I'm looking forward to sitting on my patio with you and looking out at the bay and hearing more of these stories when summer gets here.
Right on. We
Thank
will.
you. All right.